She can sleep in the garage," my daughter-in-law said, her voice cutting through the air like a blade. She didn't even look up from her phone, those perfectly manicured nails tapping against the screen with mechanical precision. "The guest room is for family." The words didn't just hit me. They detonated inside my chest like a bomb going off in slow motion. I stood frozen in the doorway, my weathered suitcase suddenly weighing 1,000 pounds in my trembling hands. Behind Linda's cold silhouette, I could see into the guest room she was denying me. The room with Egyptian cotton sheets that cost more than my monthly grocery budget. The room with a view of the garden where my husband Robert and I had planted roses on our first wedding anniversary, 37 years ago. The same roses that Linda had ripped out last spring because they clashed with her aesthetic. My son, Michael, stood beside his wife like a statue, his eyes glued to the marble floor beneath his feet, the floor Robert and I had saved for 3 years to afford, working double shifts and eating ramen dinners so we could give our son the kind of home we'd never had growing up. The same floor where Michael had taken his first wobbling steps as a baby, his chubby hands reaching for his father's outstretched arms. "Michael?" My voice cracked like old glass. "You're really going to let her?" "Mom." He finally looked up, and what I saw in his eyes made my stomach drop. Guilt, shame, and something worse. Resignation. "It's just temporary. Until we figure things out. As if I was a broken appliance that needed fixing. A problem with a neat solution hidden somewhere in the fine print. But here's what they didn't know. What nobody knew yet. 6 months ago, when I buried my husband. For 42 years, I thought I'd lost everything. The medical bills had stripped us bare. $127,000 in treatments that bought us 3 extra months together and left me with nothing but debt and a foreclosure notice. When that brutal piece of paper arrived, giving me 30 days to come up with money I didn't have, I did what any desperate mother would do. I called my only child. "Of course you can stay with us, Mom," Michael had said, his voice warm over the phone. "We're family. That's what family does for each other." Family. The word tasted like ashes now. But standing in their pristine entryway, my entryway though, they didn't remember that detail. Listening to Linda discuss my sleeping arrangements like I was a piece of furniture, I realized something that would change everything. They had no idea what was coming. "The garage has everything you need," Linda continued, finally gracing me with her attention. At 48, she was everything I'd never been. Thin, polished, sharp as a knife edge. "There's a cot set up. It'll be like camping." Camping, as if sleeping on concrete was some kind of adventure, instead of the final humiliation of a woman who'd lost everything she'd ever worked for. "How thoughtful," I said quietly, and something in my tone made Michael's head snap up. But Linda was already walking away, her heels clicking against the marble like a countdown timer. The garage smelled like motor oil and abandonment. Cardboard boxes lined the walls like silent witnesses. Christmas decorations, Michael's college stuff, ski equipment. A lifetime of memories reduced to labeled containers and shoved into dark corners. The cot was military surplus, the kind they used in refugee camps. No sheets, no blanket, no acknowledgement that the woman they were housing had once been the same woman who'd nursed their fevers, celebrated their victories, and loved them unconditionally for decades. As I sat on that sagging mattress, listening to their muffled voices through the thin walls, I made a decision that would shatter their perfect little world into pieces. I pulled out my phone and dialed a number I'd memorized 23 years ago. Harrison, Butler, and Associates. "James Harrison, please. Tell him Dorothy Brennan is calling about the Elmwood Avenue property." The pause that followed was pregnant with possibilities they couldn't imagine. Mrs. Brennan? My God, it's been years. I was so sorry to hear about Robert. Thank you, James. I need to ask you something about the house, about the deed. What he told me in the next 5 minutes would change everything, because while Linda was deciding where I could sleep, while Michael was choosing his wife's comfort over his mother's dignity, while they were both treating me like an unwanted burden, they'd forgotten one crucial detail about the house they thought they owned. The garage is fine, I said when Michael appeared with a thin pillow 20 minutes later, his face twisted with guilt. Really, it's perfect. He frowned at my tone. Too calm, too accepting. The Dorothy he knew would have fought back, would have demanded better. But this Dorothy had just learned something that made sleeping in a garage feel like a temporary inconvenience rather than a permanent defeat. Mom, I know this isn't ideal. Oh, Michael. I smiled and he took an involuntary step backward. You have no idea how ideal this is about to become. The next morning, Linda left for work without a word, her BMW purring down the driveway like a satisfied cat. Michael disappeared into his home office for back-to-back video calls. And 8-year-old Emma, my beautiful, innocent granddaughter, found me in the garage with her school backpack in tow. Grandma, why do you have to sleep out here? Mom says the guest room is for family. But aren't you family? From the mouths of babes. Your mom is absolutely right, sweetheart, I said, smoothing her hair. The guest room is for family. That's exactly right. Emma studied my face with the intensity only children possess. You look different today, Grandma. Like you have a secret. Smart girl. Maybe I do have a secret, Emma. Would you like to know what it is? She nodded eagerly. Sometimes, I whispered, the people who think they have all the power are the ones who understand the least about how the world really works. That afternoon, while Linda was at her marketing job and Michael was explaining quarterly projections to people who'd never missed a meal or slept on concrete, I did something I should have done months ago. I took a walk through the neighborhood where I'd raised my son, past Mrs. Peterson's house where she waved from her window with her walker, beside her chair, past the oak tree Michael had crashed his bike into when he was 7, the scar still visible in the bark. But I wasn't taking a nostalgic stroll down memory lane. I was inspecting my property. Because here's what Linda and Michael had conveniently forgotten when they decided to house me in their garage like an unwanted piece of furniture. When Robert and I sold them this house 5 years ago, we only transferred partial ownership. The rest was supposed to transfer to me upon Robert's death, but the paperwork was never properly filed, which meant that while they'd been paying the mortgage and playing house, I'd remained the legal owner of 51% of the property they thought was theirs. That evening, Linda served salmon for dinner, the same meal she'd been making every Tuesday for 3 years, like she was following some domestic script that never varied. She set a place for me at the dining room table, though her body language screamed that my presence was an intrusion. "How was your day, Mom?" Michael asked, cutting into his fish with surgical precision. "Enlightening," I said simply. "Very enlightening." Linda's fork paused halfway to her mouth. "What do you mean?" "Oh, just learning new things about the neighborhood, about property values, about legal documents that sometimes get overlooked." The silence that followed was electric. Michael's face had gone pale, though he probably didn't understand why yet. But somewhere in the back of his mind, a warning bell was starting to ring. "Legal documents?" Linda's voice had risen half an octave. "Nothing important," I said, taking a delicate bite of salmon. "Just some paperwork I need to sort through with my attorney." Your attorney? Michael set down his fork entirely now. Mom, what attorney? What are you talking about? But I just smiled and changed the subject to Emma's upcoming school play, watching their growing unease like a scientist observing a fascinating experiment. That night, lying on my cot in the garage, I listened to them argue through the walls. Their voices were harsh whispers, trying not to wake Emma, but the concrete carried sound like a confession booth. She's acting strange, Linda hissed. Different. What did she mean about legal documents? I don't know, Michael replied, but his voice held a tremor of recognition. It's probably nothing. Just old people talk, you know? Old people talk. As if age had made me senile instead of wise. This was supposed to be temporary, Linda continued. A few days while she figured out her next move. It's been a week, Michael. A week of her sleeping in our garage and making cryptic comments about attorneys. She's my mother, he said weakly. And I'm your wife. Doesn't that mean anything anymore? Oh, the delicious irony. While they debated my future like I was a problem to be solved, they had no idea that I held their future in my hands. The next morning brought the call I'd been waiting for. Mrs. Brennan, this is James Harrison. I've reviewed all the documentation you requested. You're absolutely right. The property transfer was never completed properly. According to the records, you maintain majority ownership of 1247 Elmwood Avenue. I stood in my son's kitchen, my kitchen, and felt a smile spread across my face for the first time in months. Not a polite smile or a defeated smile, but the kind of smile that could move mountains. What are my options, James? Well, legally speaking, you could claim immediate occupancy of the property. They've been living there as tenants, though they may not realize it. You could also choose to sell, of course, though that would require their cooperation for the best outcome. And if they don't cooperate? Forced sale, court order, the works. It wouldn't be pleasant for anyone involved. Through the kitchen window, I watched Linda loading Emma into her car for school. The same window where I used to watch Michael catch the school bus, his lunch packed with love and whatever we could afford that week. James, I want you to prepare some documents for me, and I want you to be ready to deliver them personally. Of course. When would you like this to happen? I thought about my cot in the garage, about Linda's cold dismissal and Michael's cowardly silence, about being treated like a burden instead of the woman who'd given everything to build the life they were now living. They're leaving for Disneyland tomorrow. 3 days at the Magic Kingdom while Grandma stays home to feed the dog. My voice hardened. I think that's the perfect time for them to learn some hard truths about family. Don't you? The plan was elegant in its simplicity. While they created magical memories with my granddaughter, I would create a reality they couldn't ignore. But the most beautiful part, they'd done this to themselves. Every cold word, every dismissive gesture, every night they'd left me to sleep on concrete while they enjoyed Egyptian cotton sheets in the room they'd declared was for family only. They'd forgotten that I was family, the kind of family that built the foundation they were standing on. And tomorrow, while they were meeting Mickey Mouse, they were going to learn exactly what that meant. What happens when Dorothy's plan unfolds? Will Michael finally stand up to Linda? And what devastating truth about the house will destroy their perfect suburban life forever? Smash that comment button and tell me if you think Dorothy is justified in what she's about to do. Subscribe for the most shocking family drama stories you've ever read, and share this with anyone who's ever been treated like they don't matter by their own family. Trust me, what happens next will leave you speechless. 3 days later, they returned from the Magic Kingdom. I watched from the living room window as their BMW pulled into the driveway. Disney World stickers plastered across the back windshield like badges of exclusion. Emma's face was pressed against the glass, probably still buzzing from 3 days of rides and character meet and greets. Michael looked relaxed for the first time in months, his shoulders loose, his smile genuine. And Linda looked like a woman who owned the world. They had no idea that while they were buying overpriced churros and taking selfies with Cinderella, their entire universe had shifted on its axis. The black Mercedes parked in front of their house should have been their first clue. I heard the car door slam, heard Linda's voice before I saw her face. "Whose car is that? What the hell?" The front door burst open like a dam breaking. They stumbled in with their matching luggage and souvenir bags, sunburned and exhausted, their Disney magic evaporating the moment they saw me sitting in Linda's precious white leather armchair. Not the garage, not the corner where unwanted things were stored. The living room, their living room, in their chair. "Mom?" Michael's voice cracked like a 13-year-old boy's. "What are you doing in here?" "Waiting for my family to come home," I said, my voice steady as granite. "We need to talk." Linda's eyes darted between me and the window where James Harrison was adjusting his tie beside his Mercedes. 23 years older, but still sharp as a blade. Still the kind of lawyer who charged $1,000 an hour and earned every penny. "Who is that man?" Linda demanded, her Disney glow fading to panic. "And why is he parked in our driveway?" "That's my attorney," I said, standing slowly from her chair. My knees still ached from nights on that concrete floor, but my voice had never been stronger. "We've been having the most interesting conversations about property law." The color drained from Michael's face like water from a broken dam. Somewhere in the back of his mind, buried under years of suburban comfort and willful ignorance, he knew. He'd always known this day might come. "Property law?" Linda's voice climbed toward hysteria. "What are you talking about? This is our house. We have the mortgage." "You have a mortgage on half a house," I interrupted, my words dropping like stones into still water. "The half that was legally transferred to you 5 years ago. The other half..." I paused, watching their faces crumble. In real time. "The other half has belonged to me since your father died." Emma dropped her stuffed Mickey Mouse, sensing the electricity in the air even if she didn't understand it. The poor child had just returned from the happiest place on Earth, only to walk into a war zone disguised as a living room. "That's impossible," Linda whispered, but her voice held no conviction. "We own this house. We've been living here for 5 years. We renovated the kitchen. We installed the marble floors. My marble floors," I corrected gently. "In my house, that you've been living in as tenants, though I've been remarkably generous about collecting rent." James Harrison chose that moment to make his entrance, stepping through the front door I'd left open like a stage cue in a perfectly choreographed play. He carried a leather briefcase that looked older than Emma and twice as expensive as Linda's car. "Good afternoon," he said, his voice carrying the authority of 3 decades in family law. "I'm James Harrison, Mrs. Brennan's attorney. I believe we have some matters to discuss." The silence that followed was so complete, I could hear the grandfather clock ticking in the hallway. The same clock Robert and I had bought for our 10th anniversary. Back when 10 years seemed like forever and we couldn't imagine ever being apart. "This is insane," Linda said, but her voice was hollow. "We bought this house. We have the deed." "You have a deed for 50% ownership," James replied smoothly, opening his briefcase with surgical precision. The remaining 51% was never properly transferred upon Mr. Brennan's death 6 months ago. According to California property law, Mrs. Brennan is the majority owner of this residence. He pulled out a manila folder thick with documents, each page a nail in the coffin of their suburban paradise. But we've been paying the mortgage, Michael said weakly, grasping for any logic that would make this nightmare make sense. We've been maintaining the property, paying taxes. As tenants? James nodded approvingly. Mrs. Brennan appreciates your stewardship of her property. However, recent events have convinced her that new living arrangements might be more appropriate for everyone involved. I watched my son's face cycle through the stages of grief at light speed. Denial, anger, bargaining, depression, all flashing across his features like a broken slot machine. "Mom, please," he said, his voice breaking. "We can work this out. You don't have to do this. We're family. Family." I let the word hang in the air like smoke. Yes, Michael. We are family. And you know what families do for each other? I walked to the mantelpiece and picked up one of their carefully curated photos. A professional shot of the three of them at some beach resort. All white teeth and coordinated outfits. Not a single photo in the entire house included Robert or me. We'd been erased from their version of family history, as thoroughly as if we'd never existed. Families don't make each other sleep in garages, I said quietly. Families don't count down the days until unwanted relatives leave. Families don't tell each other that guest rooms are only for real family members. Linda's face had gone from sunburn to ash gray. You can't be serious. This is our home. Emma's home. You can't just... Can't I? I set the photo down gently and turned to face her fully. Tell me, Linda, where exactly did you think I was going to go? What was your long-term plan for the depressed old woman who was moping around your house? The words hit her like physical blows. Her own words, thrown back at her with interest. It was supposed to be temporary. Everything is temporary, I said. Your comfort, your security, your belief that you can treat people like disposable inconveniences without consequences. James cleared his throat politely. Mrs. Brennan has several options at this point. She could claim immediate occupancy of the master bedroom, as is her right as majority owner. She could charge fair market rent for your continued tenancy. Or... He paused dramatically, and I almost smiled at his theatrical timing. She could choose to sell the property entirely. Of course, that would require everyone to vacate while the house is prepared for market. Sell? Michael's voice was barely a whisper. Mom, you can't sell. This is Emma's home, her school, her friends. The same school she'll be starting kindergarten. In a few months? I asked. The same friends she made in a neighborhood you moved to 5 years ago? Children are resilient, Michael. They adapt. It's amazing what they can survive when the adults in their lives actually prioritize their well-being. Emma tugged on her father's shirt, confusion and fear radiating from her small frame. Daddy, what's happening? Why is everyone upset? I knelt, down to her level. My granddaughter's face so achingly familiar. She had Michael's eyes, the same ones that used to look at me with absolute trust and love. Grandma has some important decisions to make, sweetheart, I said gently. About where everyone is going to live. Are you not sleeping in the garage anymore? The question hung in the air like an accusation. Even Emma, at 8 years old, had understood that something was fundamentally wrong with the arrangement her parents had created. "No, baby girl," I said, standing slowly. "Grandma is not sleeping in the garage anymore." I walked to the staircase, my hand trailing along the banister Robert had installed himself during our first renovation. Every inch of this house held memories they'd tried to erase, love they'd tried to replace with their sterile perfection. "I'll be in the master bedroom," I announced, my voice carrying through the stunned silence. "The room with the best view of the garden your grandfather and I planted on our first anniversary." "You can't do this," Linda whispered, but the fight had gone out of her voice. "Actually, she can," James said matter-of-factly. "Property law is quite clear on this matter. Mrs. Brennan has been extraordinarily patient, but patience has its limits." I paused on the third step, the one that still creaked after 30 years, the one Robert had promised to fix 1,000 times but never quite got around to. "James will explain your options," I said without turning around. "You have 30 days to decide whether you'd like to buy out my share of the property or find alternative living arrangements. I suggest you use that time to remember what family actually means." As I climbed the stairs to what was now my bedroom, I heard Emma ask her parents why everyone was crying. I heard Linda's phone hit the marble floor and shatter. I heard Michael sink into a chair and make a sound that might have been a sob. But most clearly of all, I heard James Harrison's calm, professional voice explaining the legal realities of their situation, each word another nail in the coffin of their suburban paradise. The master bedroom looked exactly as I remembered it, though Linda had replaced our furniture with pieces that probably cost more than Robert's car. I opened the closet and breathed in the faint scent of lavender sachets I'd left behind years ago, still there beneath layers of Linda's expensive perfumes. This room held 40 years of memories. Christmas mornings, sick days, quiet conversations, in the dark with the man I'd loved more than life itself, fights and reconciliations, dreams shared and sorrows weathered together. The guest room might be for family, but this room was home, and I wasn't going anywhere. An hour later, I heard James's Mercedes start up and drive away, taking with him the last of their illusions about who held the power in this situation. The house fell silent except for the muffled sounds of crisis, hushed phone calls, desperate internet searches, the quiet desperation of people whose world had just imploded. Around dinner time, there was a soft knock on my door. "Grandma?" Emma's small voice was muffled by the wood. "Can I come in?" I opened the door to find my granddaughter holding a plate of dinosaur-shaped chicken nuggets and a juice box. "Mom and Dad are too upset to make dinner," she said matter-of-factly. "But I thought you might be hungry." I accepted the plate with all the solemnity it deserved. "Thank you, sweetheart. That's very thoughtful." She climbed onto the bed beside me, her small legs swinging over the edge. "Are Mom and Dad going to have to move away?" "I don't know yet," I said honestly. "That depends on what they decide to do." "Will I have to change schools?" "Maybe. Would that scare you?" She considered this with the seriousness only children can bring to life-changing questions. "A little. But if you're here, it might be okay. You make things feel safer." My throat tightened with emotion I'd been holding back for months. "You make things feel safer too, Emma." We sat in comfortable silence, sharing dinosaur nuggets and watching the sun set over the garden where her grandfather had taught her to plant marigolds last spring, before cancer stole him away and left me to navigate this cruel new world alone. The next morning, I woke up in my own bed for the first time in 9 months. Real sheets, real pillows, and a view of roses that had survived Linda's renovation attempts and bloomed defiantly every spring, no matter who tried to control them. Michael was waiting for me in the kitchen when I came down for breakfast. He looked like he'd aged 10 years overnight. His hair mussed, his eyes red-rimmed with exhaustion and tears. "Mom," he said quietly. "We need to talk." "I'm listening." "I'm sorry." The words came out broken, desperate. "I'm so sorry for everything. For Linda, for the garage, for not standing up for you, for forgetting who you are, what you mean to this family." I poured myself coffee from the machine Robert had bought me for Mother's Day 15 years ago. The one Linda had relegated to. The garage, but never quite thrown away. "Go on," I said. "I don't know how we got here," he continued, his voice thick with shame. "When did I become the kind of man who lets his wife treat his mother like a burden? When did I forget that everything we have, this house, this life, started with you and Dad? The same time you stopped seeing me as a person and started seeing me as a problem to be managed," I said simply. He flinched as if I'd slapped him. I know. And I hate myself for it. But Mom, please. Emma loves this house. Her whole life is here. If there's any way we can work this out, there is," I said, setting down my coffee cup. "But it requires something from you that I'm not sure you're capable of giving." "Anything," he said quickly. "Whatever you need." "I need you to be my son, again," I said quietly. "Not Linda's husband who happens to have a mother. Not the man who chooses peace over principles. I need you to be the boy who used to defend me from playground bullies and mean neighbors." His face crumpled. "I want to be that person again. I do. But Linda is your wife," I interrupted. "But I am your mother. And for the past 6 months, while I was losing everything I'd ever worked for, you let her treat me like I was nothing. Like my grief didn't matter. My fear didn't matter. My dignity didn't matter. She was jealous," he said quietly, "of how close you and Dad were, of how much I looked up to him. She felt like she could never compete with the family you and Dad built, so she decided to destroy it instead of joining it." The silence stretched between us like a chasm. "I can't change what's already happened," he said finally. "But I can change what happens next, if you'll let me." I studied my son's face, looking for the boy I'd raised, the man I'd hoped he'd become. Underneath the guilt and exhaustion, I saw something I hadn't seen in years. Backbone. "What about Linda? Linda will learn to adapt," he said, and there was steel in his voice I hadn't heard before. "This is your house, Mom. It always was. We're just grateful you're letting us stay." From the doorway came the sound of sharp heels on marble. Linda appeared in the kitchen like a storm cloud, her face a mask of barely controlled fury. "So that's it?" she said, her voice vibrating with rage. "We're just going to roll over and let her destroy our lives?" Michael turned to face his wife, and I watched something fundamental shift in his posture. "Our lives aren't destroyed, Linda. They're just different now." "Different?" She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "We're about to lose our home, our equity, our future, and you call it different?" "We never lost anything that was really ours," he said quietly. "And we're not losing our home. We're just sharing it, the way family should." Linda's face went white with shock. In 8 years of marriage, he'd never contradicted her so directly, so completely. "You're choosing her over me," she whispered. I'm choosing what's right over what's convenient," he replied. "There's a difference." The silence that followed was electric with possibility. Linda could fight this, could make our lives miserable with lawyers and resentment and passive-aggressive warfare. Or she could accept that the balance of power had shifted permanently and irreversibly. The guest room really is for family, I said quietly, breaking the tension. And you are family, Linda. Both of you. This house is big enough for all of us, if we can remember how to treat each other with respect. She stared at me for a long moment, her eyes bright with unshed tears. The master bedroom, she asked, is mine, I said firmly, as it should be. And the garage will be used for cars and storage, like normal people do. She closed her eyes and took a shuddering breath. When she opened them again, something had changed. I was terrible to you, she said, her voice barely audible. Cruel and heartless and everything I swore I'd never become. Yes, I agreed. You were. I don't know how to fix this. One day at a time, I said. One kindness at a time. One conversation at a time where you remember that I'm not your enemy. I'm Emma's grandmother, and Michael's mother, and a woman who has loved this family longer than you've been alive. 6 months later, Linda knocked on my bedroom door with a cup of tea, and an apology that had taken her half a year to find the words for. A year later, Michael installed a ramp for Mrs. Peterson next door, and Linda didn't roll her eyes when I invited her over for dinner. 2 years later, when Emma started middle school, she chose to do her family history project on the grandmother who taught her that standing up for yourself isn't mean. It's necessary. And 5 years later, when Linda's mother lost her own home to medical debt, the first words out of her mouth were, "The guest room is ready, Mom. Welcome to the family." Because sometimes the people who hurt us the most are the ones who need to learn the hardest lessons about love. And sometimes the only way to teach those lessons is to show them what real power looks like when it's wielded with wisdom instead of weakness. The garage is for cars now. The guest room is for family. And the master bedroom belongs to the woman who built this house with love, lost it to circumstances beyond her control, and reclaimed it with the kind of quiet strength that can move mountains. Some stories end with forgiveness. Some end with revenge. The best ones end with justice, served at exactly the right temperature. If this story moved you, smash that comment button and tell me about a time when you had to stand up for yourself against impossible odds. Subscribe for more stories about ordinary people doing extraordinary things. And share this with anyone who needs to remember that it's never too late to reclaim your power and your dignity. Because sometimes, the best revenge isn't getting even. It's getting everything you deserve.